out here. So all that we create is a one-to-one mapping. So a resource group cannot go under multiple subscriptions. So for example, if I go ahead and look at this one, and if you see this, I can move a resource group from one subscription to the other. I can go ahead say move the resource group from one subscription to the other out here. If I have multiple subscriptions out here, I can move it, but I cannot have the same resource groups under multiple subscription. Neither I can have exactly. So later, if you go and create resources, they will definitely basically be associated to one subscription at a time. Yes. Any more questions, guys?
Text box.
Text box. Let's see text box out here. So to say two different tenant IDs cannot have one shared subscription, right? Exactly. You cannot have this scenario. It's all one-to-one mapping. If a company has one tenant, why do they need more than one tenants out here? Again, same thing. Why do a company needs one? I mean, more than let's say one subscription. It's the same thing. Why a company needs more than one tenant? You can have more tenants out here too. Meaning, let's say I am a company called Tata. I want individual tenants for each and every let's say company like Tata Motors and all these things out, so that I establish an absolute watertight separation between all of them. So I can go ahead and create multiple tenants under let's say one particular directory as well. In my case, even I belong to multiple tenants. For example, this is a tenant where I belong to. If I say switch my directory, I have one more tenant associated with myself. If I say switch this out, I go into altogether a different tenant as such. And this is a pay as you go account. This is a pay as you go account that I'm let's say using. I have a different subscription and all these things out here. So I can switch between tenants provided I have the access. Again, let's switch back.
Yeah, is there any benefits of taking multiple tenants in a company, or
The benefit
is it?
is the benefit is ease of management, meaning the bill that you generate on a monthly basis will get generated at a tenant level. So it's easy for me to manage, let's say, billing for, let's say, Tata Motors individually, Tata Finance individually, and all these things, rather than to have club them all these things and let's say go with, let's say, a cumulative account out here. So from an administration perspective, let's say if I'm a billing administrator, I want to pay the
Okay.
bills of all these things. It's easy for me to segregate between a bill from one, let's say, subscription to the other, and all those things, vice versa. Does that answer your question? Or
So
any more
Kiran,
questions, guys?
I feel that region-wise we have different price of subscription, right? For hourly basis, central we have different price, and east US are different price, right?
Uh, Correct. I mean, yes, partially correct. But here, when you're talking about purely in a resource group perspective, it's the same price across. Meaning, firstly, if you go ahead create thousands of resource groups, I mean, it can also be millions of resource groups out here. There is no charge that will incur. There is no cost. If you create a resource group, just leave it that way. There's no cost at all. The cost occurs when you go ahead and create an actual resource. And is there a difference between different regions? Yes, depending upon the feature, there is a price difference, there's a cost difference between different regions as such.
In this subject is applicable whenever we create the virtual machine, right?
Correct, correct. Can we mark and add users who are already a part of the subscription to the group? Yes, a good question. I'm coming down to that. Is my resource group data stored in location which I will give, or there's a backup? Depends upon depends upon the resource that you create. Resource group as such is not backed up. Resource group is just like a folder. It's just an empty folder I've created. There's no backup for this one. But backup comes into picture when you actually go ahead and create something called as the resources, like storage and all these things. Those come with the backup services as such. So let's come here. Let's park a couple of questions. Let's come here. Now, when we went into something called as subscription, we saw something called as what? IAM, access control, wherein you can go ahead, add a particular user, give him a particular access. So this is what I had. when I'm using, let's say, a subscription, or when I'm using a subscription out here, I initially added a particular user called classes Azure Devops test or something like this. I added this user at the tenant, and then I assigned this user a permission onto the subscription using something called as what? IAM. So I can add him like a owner or a contributor or a reader and all these things out. If I go back into the resource groups that I created, and let's say I go into the first resource group out here, there is also something called what? IAM, identity and access management. Let's say the user that I'm adding is a developer, and I have multiple resource groups in my case. Now, my intention is that the developer whom I add should only have the access to that first RG, not everything. Just that first resource group, not anything else. Can I do that? Of course, yes. You can also have a control. That's the reason there is something called as the access control that is there on the resource group level as well. Now, how does this work out? Let's see that. Let me go back into firstly the Azure Active Directory, wherein I need to start firstly creating a user. So I'll say users. I'll say create a new user. So I'll create a user right now, and I'll say this user's name is something called developer. Let's say one. So I'm creating a user with a name called developer one. I'll say he's a developer. I'll just go down. I'll create a password for him. So I'm creating some password for him, some random password for him, and I'll say create. So now I have something called as a developer whom I just created. Now what I'm going to do is I'll come down, and yesterday or in the before class, we went ahead into the subscription, and in the subscription we said access control and said added this particular developer and gave him a role called as in, let's say, a contributor or an owner, etc., so that that particular developer can have the access to my particular subscription out here. This time around I'll do slightly different. I will add this developer only to the first resource group, because now the condition is that the developer should only be a part of that particular first resource group as a contributor. Let's do this. Let's say identity and access management, and add someone, say role assignment, and I'll say contributor. I'll say next. I'll say add members or select members out here, and I look for what? That particular developer, and say select, and I'll say review and assign. I'm now saying review and assign out here. So I'm now assigning a role called contributor to a developer only where at this resource group only. I have an owner role at a subscription level. So I am able to see all my resource groups. Whatever that I created, whatever someone else creates, I'm able to see all these things out here. Let's do one thing. Let's now log in like that developer. So let's take that particular ID of that particular developer. So this is the ID, the entire ID out here. I'm taking this ID. I'll go into an incognito window, and I'll say portal.azure.com, and let me log in like this particular developer. And it's asking me to enter the password. So I would have got a password out here. I enter that. And as and when I enter it, Microsoft will ask me to update the password. So I'll firstly update this out. Retype it. I'll say skip this for 14 days. And I am logging into the same tenant. I'm logging into the same tenant out here. So if I go into the tenant ID, I'm logging into the same ID out here. But if I now go and look for resource groups, do you see what is that I'm able to see here? Only the first resource group out here. Reason being, I am added only at this particular resource group. For reason which I'll only be able to see this particular resource group. I, as an owner, I am added at a subscription level. I'm now added at a subscription level. So I will be able to see all these resource groups out here. The question here, I'll slightly twist this out. What if the same developer one, now the developer one is here as a contributor, is added as a contributor. What if I take the same developer one, add him into the subscription as a reader? Can I do that? To, let's say, create something, but he can see something. He can see all the resource groups if I do that. So my question now is that the same developer is added at the resource group. So he's able to see these particular resource groups out here. You would be able to see something like this particular resource group. And if this particular developer goes here, says access control, clicks on this, disabled, because I'm a contributor. As a contributor, I cannot go ahead and add another user. This is something that I cannot do. But if I say view my access, what am I? A contributor to what? This resource. When it says this resource, is a contributor where? On the first resource group. This is the resource where he's a contributor on. Now my point is that can I add the same developer called developer one at a subscription as a reader? If I do that, then what is going to happen? Anyone, if you want to take a random guess. All the resources will be shown to him. But what will happen to this particular first resource group? Will he still be a contributor? Will he change into a reader? Let's check that out. Let's go here. And I'm logged in as the owner. Classes Azure Devops is the owner. So that's the reason I'll be able to add something. So I'll say Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. Let's go into identity and access management. Let's say add. I'll say add what? A role assignment. And I'll say what? A reader role. I'll say next. I'll say select members. And I'll select this particular developer. So select this out. So review and assign. So review and assign, I'm assigning this out, and it will take around a minute or two for that particular developer to get reflected. But I now have a conflicting role. The developer, the same developer called develop one, is a reader at the subscription level, but he is a contributor for what? One particular resource group. He's a contributor for one particular resource group out here. So there is a conflict in the role. Is a contributor the same developer as a reader? There's a conflict in the role. And if you were to visit the Microsoft documentation, say RBAC Azure conflicting, something like this. Let's see, role-based access control. Let's come down. So do you see something called, this is the documentation that I'm, let's say, really interested into to understand about what is a role-based access control and etc. So just type in what's a role-based access control, the first documentation you get. Look at this one telling what can I do with a role-based access control. Let's go with that. And there is something called multiple role assignments. Let's understand this. But before we understand this, tell me what will happen to this developer. As a reader, I'll just firstly go here. Let's come back, just refresh my screen. Now I'll still be able to see this, reason being some, yeah. As and when I refresh this out, let's say close this out, I'm able to see all the resource groups that are there in my subscription. So I have the first RG, the second RG, the VM RG, and also something called as a network watcher RG out here. Same thing, what I'm able to see, what I as a user, I as an owner, I'm able to see all these things out. If I go ahead and add a third RG out here, let's say I do third RG, I just create this out. I am not adding the tags, these are optional in nature, so I'm just skipping the tags for now. I'll just create this out here, and I now have the third resource group. So let's understand a couple of scenarios. So scenario A, will the developer one be able to see the third resource group as well? Yes, because he's a reader at a subscription. So if he's a reader at a subscription, he will be able to see all the resources under that particular subscription. So let's go back. Again, for this particular role to get reflected, it will take a minute. And do you see now? I have a third RG. But let's understand what is really happening out here. So let's go to the first RG and I'll say create something, okay? As in when I say create something, there are a list of resources that I can go ahead and create. Let's say I want to create something like this particular resource out here called a storage account. We'll understand what a storage account really is out here. But let's see this. This one doesn't really give me out here. Let's do one thing. Let's create something and let's see. Let's say create. And here, what happens when you create something is that it needs a subscription, it needs a resource group. Do you see what is happening here? Perform this action without all these operations, something like write and something like write out here. I'm just a reader. I'm just a reader for the second RG. Reason being, I was added as a reader on the subscription. I will inherit this particular permission. The inheritance meaning is always top to bottom, meaning if I am added as a reader on the subscription, all the resource groups under that particular subscription will have an access called reader. This is called inheritance. So if I go back into the resource groups, I'll go into the second RG. I'll say access control. I'll say view my access. Do you see what I get here? Reader. It's called what? Inherited from where? The subscription. On a subscription, I had a reader. I inherit all those things out here. Let's go into the first RG. This is something that I'm curious about. I'll say view my access. Do you see what I have? I have a contributor and I also have a reader. Contributor is where? This resource, only that particular resource group. Reader is where? Subscription inherited. I inherit this particular permission out here. Now what Azure will do is if I have multiple role assignments, Azure will add both the roles and give me what is the sum of both the roles out here. The role permissions in Azure are always additive in nature. So here if you see, a contributor and a reader will always and always give you something called as a contributor out here. Contributor has a greater permission, reader has a lesser permission when compared to that particular contributor. So a contributor plus a reader, meaning as a reader, sorry, as a contributor, I can also go ahead and read. Plus, I can also go ahead and let's say change something and edit something, delete something and something like that. As a reader, I cannot change, I cannot delete, I can just read something out. Contributor itself has a reader role inside it. Meaning as a contributor, you first have to read and then you have to let's say go and write, delete, execute something like that. So Azure will now do a addition of all these things. So if that's what it's telling. So if you have multiple role assignments, Azure RBAC is an additive model. The effective permission is a sum of your role assignments. In this case, the sum here will be reader plus contributor. Exactly. Only for that particular resource only. Reason being, this is the resource where I added that particular user as a contributor. So that's the reason he's a contributor plus a reader. But if I go into the third RG, only reader, exactly. Reason being, this is being inherited from the subscription. So I cannot go ahead, delete this out. So for example, if I want to delete a resource group, I just need to come here. There is an option called delete resource group. If I click on this, it will ask me to type the name of the resource group out here, which is called third RG. You can type it or you can just copy it from here. We'll see that. Copy this out. Fail to delete. Exactly. He can delete the first RG. Yes. He has a contributor out here. So if I go to the first RG, if I do the same operation, let's type this out in. It's deleting the resource group. It will take a minute to delete this out for that particular developer only. Correct. So developer one, exactly, because that developer is added as a contributor out here. Sorry. It will as in like the developer or the resource group. Okay. So if I go here, first resource group is deleted, right? For the company, for the subscription is deleted out here. As a developer, I deleted it. If I log in like an owner, I'm able to see the first RG. Just refresh this page. For everyone, it'll get, let's say, deleted out there. So it depends on who's deleting and how they're deleting and all that stuff. Yes, any questions that I can take till here on the role assignments? Exactly, this is a danger part. Exactly, reason being, as an owner, you have an option to go ahead and apply something called lock. You can lock your resources so that someone doesn't accidentally delete it out. Again, question a lot of students can ask is that a user called developer deleted the first resource group. Is there a way to, let's say, kind of take it back, restore it? Yes, exactly. No, there isn't a way to restore it back. Resource group deletion is undoable. So even if you delete something out here, if I say delete this out, warning deleting the resource group is what? Irreversible. The warning itself tells you that what the resource group deletion is irreversible. So if you delete it, there is no way that you can, let's say, restore it back. The only way you can restore it back is to create a new one. That's how you can restore it. Uh, Again, good question. Is there a way you can have a backup of your resources? That's where automation comes into picture. You have templates, you have code and etc. that will hold the configuration of a resource. In case it gets deleted, you can go ahead and restore it back again. That's where automation as a let's say as a picture comes into picture. Great. Yes. If you have three RGs, okay, you have one developer. What is the access that you have given? Or the question that I can ask is that where you have given that particular developer an access? Is it you given for the first RG? What kind of access did you give that particular developer one on the first? As a okay, again, contributor, reader, contributor. Okay, great. Okay, okay. Can I make reader as a developer? No. Can you make developer as a reader or developer as a contributor? Yes. See, again, developer is a name, reader, contributor is a role. Two different things out here. There is no role called developer. There is no custom or there's no defined role called developer. You can create a role called developer. That's a different question. But there is no predefined role called developer. So you assign a role to a particular user. Okay. Any more questions here, guys? Anyone? Any more questions here?
Hi Kiran.
Good. Please. Good.
Only owner and contributor have the right to delete the RG, and reader can also can delete their RG.
No, as a reader, I cannot delete the RG. For example, I am a reader here on something called third RG. Let's come back. There is something called VMRG where I have a lot of resources, actual resources out here. As a reader, if I go here into access control, if I say view my access, I am a reader out here and I inherited this particular permission from a subscription. And if I try to delete it, if I try to delete this particular group out here, saying VM-RG, I will immediately get a failure telling that failed to delete the resource group. The client called developer one does not have the authorization to perform this particular action. He cannot perform this particular action out here. Reason being, he is just a reader. As a reader, you can only look at that particular resources, cannot delete it out.
If we count,
Does good, please. Yes. Any more questions here? Okay.
Hey,
As we
hi,
give.
Kiran.
Good, please.
Hey, hi. Kiran, if you delete the resource group,
Mhm.
how can we back up like swipe up OS in like booting the virtual machine like, on this way, or is any other way to recover the?
No way to recover it. You'll have to, let's say, come through an automation. If you delete a resource group, all the resources inside will be deleted. It's an irreversible process. You'll have to recreate them back again.
Okay.
Yes, as we gave contributor in RG, user will be able to modify anything in the RG, even though user is a reader in the subscription. Yes, in that particular RG called first RG, he can modify anything, he can add anything, and etc. In the remaining, which is second, third, fourth, and etc., the user cannot add anything. He can just see something. He cannot modify something out there. Yes. Any more questions here, guys? Correct. A contributor can modify and create anything in that particular RG where he is a contributor. All right. Any more questions, guys? Any more questions that I can take? Again, what
Kiran,
I want. Go ahead, please. Sorry.
Kiran, can we have a example for deleting the resource group? Can we back up in the next class? It's very useful. Like,
Again, you cannot back up. That's what I was telling. You cannot back up the resource group itself. You can back up the resources. I'll also show that, but we need to get into automation for me to show that. If it gets deleted, how do you restore it and all these things? Hmm. Exactly. It itself is a backup of the resource group. If you back up all the resources in a resource group, because resource group itself doesn't make, let's say, any value addition. Resource group is nothing but a namespace which can hold all your resources, but you can back up the actual resources out here. If you look at this one, these are all the backup that you get here. All these are the actual resources which we'll be looking in. Let's say I don't, let's say, emphasize on that right now. We can back up all those resources. Not really. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how do you, let's say, create and have a backup of it and all those things. Hmm. uh, if a developer is deleting a resource group, again, if you're saying a contributor, who's a contributor here? There should be a person who should be a contributor. Contributor is just a role, is a role. I've assigned a role called contributor to someone called developer. So when you say contributor, I ask who's assigned that particular contributor. Is it developer one, developer two, and etc.? So let's say, for example, developer two is deleting something. Developer one is not notified. Is not notified. No, he cannot be notified out there. Yes, sorry. Someone, you had a question, sorry. Types of roles, again, owner. There are three broad classifications. Those are three broad classifications out here, but you can also achieve some kind of a granularity out here. So let's say, for example, if I go into a particular role and say role assignments out here, these are three broad classifications called owner, reader, and contributor, but I can have all these things out here. For example, let's say I want a specific role for a resource group. Let's go there and I say resource group. Let's say resource group out here. Again, since resource group is not an actual resource, it doesn't is not listed out here. On a resource group, you can, let's say, go ahead assign all these roles as such. So again, a very broad role, and each and every resource that we see will again come back to the roles and understand what is a particular role you can assign to a particular resource and how it kind of becomes. Yes. All right. So with that, I need to close today's session, and we'll take a couple of more questions. Again, I'm not taking questions right now. So what is the difference between roles contributing to a particular RG? We'll take more questions out here before we start the session tomorrow. So I will stop the session today because I have another class just following. So we'll take more questions tomorrow. We'll get started with that. And thank you guys. Have a good day ahead. Thank you.